myself with guessing accents. Would I be right in saying Northern Ireland?
Close. Scottish.
Scottish. Damn it. I lived in Glasgow for a year.
Wow, when about?
1997, 98. A long time ago.
What were you up to over here?
It was a postgraduate program. It was called the John Logie Baird Center. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was this like media studies program with Glasgow University and Strathclyde University. It had like the film studies program at Glasgow University. This professor Simon Frith was at Strathclyde. He was doing popular music studies, and so I did this like popular music studies program.
Why do I know the name Simon Frith?
I think he's a pretty well-known popular music scholar. He was on the Mercury Music Prize board for a while, maybe, and I think he's at Stirling University now. I can't remember.
Yeah, they've got a pretty big arts thing going on up there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's been writing about music for like at least 40 or 50 years, and his brother's Fred Frith, who like was a fairly well-known like kind of like improv jazz musician kind of person.
You had did you not used to have something to do with improv jazz as well when you were in college, like a radio show or something?
I listened to quite a bit, but I never actually like played any. But yeah, when I was in college, I did quite a few radio shows. I did like a jazz show and a rock show. Yeah, when I went to college in Chicago in the early to mid 90s, and there was a lot of kind of like that kind of music. There's this dude, John Corbett, who still lives in Chicago, who was a grad student when I was at Northwestern. He's really into like kind of like the European like improv free jazz scene, and he, I think, almost single-handedly was responsible for bringing a lot of the kind of like European great improvisers over to Chicago to play shows, and they would play shows with a lot of the Chicago jazz musicians, and kind of created a bit of a scene then at the time. And there was like a kind of like a weekly improv jazz series at the Empty Bottle back in like the mid 90s, I remember. So it was an interesting time.
Is that what kind of drew you to the Cloud Nothings release? Not Cloud Nothings, but the Baldy thing, the kind of free form jazz records.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, Carpark doesn't really release jazz music, but I listen to a lot of jazz music. I listen to all types of music, but it was just kind of like Dylan and Jason from Cloud Nothings were talking about this record, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, let me know how it goes. Like, I think it would be cool for us to release it, because I like to keep the label, kind of like diverse and interesting, and putting out different types of music. So it just it was a good opportunity. And they're, it wasn't like, oh, jazz record, let's put it out. I mean, they are very talented musicians, and Dylan basically grew up playing saxophone. He was in like school orchestras and stuff. They definitely know their history and stuff. So
it's interesting. You were saying, you like to kind of keep it fresh and put out a lot of different stuff on the label. But when you first started, it was kind of centered around the electronic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it easier to begin when you kind of have something like that to center yourself around, and then kind of diversify and becomes quite a natural process? Or
I mean, I guess I was really thinking about it, to be honest. When I first started, like when I started the label, I was living in New York City, and it was like 1999, and I was like DJing with friends at this club every week, and we were playing like all kinds of like weird electronic music and like IBM stuff. We were like pretty much like the only people doing that kind of stuff in New York City at the time. And it was, pretty new. Laptops were becoming cheaper and more powerful. So people were finally able to like kind of make their own music digitally for the first time. But anyway, I was meeting all these people, and that was just sort of how it came about. I was like working at a record store and like DJing, and I was kind of looking for something else to do with my life. I obviously was thinking not obviously, but I was thinking, can't work in a record store the rest of my life. Being like a super music nerd, I had thought about starting a label years before and stuff, but I always talked myself out of it. My musical tastes were always kind of like changing so quickly, and I always felt like music labels had like a thing going on with like a certain type of music, and I always kind of talked myself out of it. But for whatever reason, at this point in my life, I was like, you know what, there's like, I'm meeting like all these cool people who are making awesome music, electronic music. So I'm just going to like start an electronic label. That's what I did. And went like that for a few years. And then I kind of got as I guess to be expected, I got kind of tired of just putting out electronic music and started looking to get involved with different types of music. And it still kind of was electronic for a while, but with like some other stuff mixed in. And then, but I feel like the story is kind of like by the time I moved down to the DC area, like 2005, like a year or two later, is kind of like, I just kind of like got to the point where I was like, you know what, I don't think anyone cares besides me. If this is an electronic label, I'm just going to put out whatever I want. That was kind of like when Carpark started just becoming more eclectic, I guess. You know, we started putting out more like bands and stuff, you know, got involved with the Baltimore scene and like Beach House and Dan Deacon and a lot of other people in the area at that time.
Is that why the imprints kind of started as well? When you began to diversify, does it become easier to kind of categorize it a little bit?
Yeah, I was like, I had Carpark and I was like, okay, Carpark's an electronic label, but I'm getting kind of tired of just playing electronic music. But for some reason, you know, at that point, I was like, I didn't think I could actually put other types of music out in Carpark. I was still kind of like limiting myself. So then I was like, well, then we'll start some imprints, and was friendly with some of the guys in Animal Collective. And I was like, well, these guys are awesome. Like I should start a label with them, because, you know, there was this thing back then when they first started. It was a little bit confusing, I thought, because, you know, there were four of them, and they didn't want to call themselves Animal Collective when they first started. They didn't want to be like labeled. And so they were just, when they would play, it would just be like billed as like the members who were playing, like AV Terror and Panda Bear, or AV Terror, Panda Bear, and Geologists. So I was like, well, you know, we should start this label. And so it would be like Animal Collective label. And that way it would kind of like maybe eliminate some of the confusion as to like who's doing what, or, you know, people wouldn't have to wonder so much. And then also around the same time, I had met Dan Selzer, who was DJing, had like this like post-punk DJ party in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We were talking, and he was like trying to reissue this Theoretical Girls record, which is like, you know, this like post-punk band that Glenn Branco was in, and Jeffrey Lone. He kind of he had like the audio, and he was talking to Jeff Lone, and he had like the ideas, but he didn't really know how to like kind of get it out there. So I was like, well, you know, if we both work together, we could like have this cool like post-punk label. I mean, he wanted to do a post-punk label from the beginning, but, you know, I was just, when we started talking, I was like, well, you know, you can pick the projects, and I'll, you know, kind of do all the, you know, other stuff that is not your strong suit. And that was kind of how Acute started. And so I had kind of like those three labels for a while. Those two sub-labels kind of petered out after many years. And then, so now we do have two other sub-labels at the moment. We have Company Records, which is kind of like Chaz from Toro y Moi's label. And then we have Wax 9, which is Sadie from Speedy Ortiz and Sad 13's label.
Well, when you first kind of started off doing those imprints, was it common for artists to kind of be that collaborative with a label in that way and kind of have their own thing going on?
I don't know. Maybe there were a few maybe kind of like artist-driven labels. I'm sure we weren't the first one to do that or anything. I don't know if it was common, but I'm sure there were people who had done it, you know, and where I got the idea from. I don't think it just kind of came to me out of nowhere, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head, to be honest.
Has the way in which that collaboration kind of functions when it's an artist collaborating with a label, is that different and changed and evolved in any way as time's gone on?
I don't think so. It's, you know, I would say it's, you know, obviously a bit more difficult to run an imprint with kind of like, you know, another person, because then you have more people, more cooks to deal with, so to speak. But it's not that much different. I mean, essentially we, you know, it's kind of like behind the scenes, we're all doing pretty much the same thing. It's just has a different logo on the back.
Yeah, still the same team behind it though.
Yeah, it's all the same people. You know, like, you know, the only difference is like with a company release, we're working more with, you know, Chaz, because he likes to be involved with like, you know, artwork or audio stuff, or Sadie on a Wax 9 release. Whereas, you know, if it's just a Carpark release, we're just basically working directly with the artist, or if they have a manager or something like that.
Is that something that kind of indie labels can offer, maybe that the majors can't? That kind of closer sense of collaboration, where they're involved in every aspect in a way that a lot of artists seem to want to be nowadays.
Probably. I mean, I've never really worked at a major label, but I would imagine it would be a lot easier to do that kind of stuff with an indie label, just because, at least with us, we're used to, like, our whole thing is to work with the artist directly as much as possible and have them as involved as they want to be and make sure everything's the way they want it. Whereas, I know that probably happens on major labels, but I know there's also stories about, A&R people like telling people that they can't do certain things and that sort of stuff. And, we don't usually get involved in that kind of stuff unless there's something really, really striking that we have to say something about, I guess. But I'm sure there are some artist side labels involved or affiliated with major labels, but I can't speak about them.
What do you mean when you say something kind of striking that you would have to say something about?
I don't know. I don't know if it's ever happened to us, but I don't know if someone had something that was horribly racist or homophobic, or just something that was just oh no, we can't let this go kind of thing, or if I don't know, if we thought something sounded so bad that, it's we had to say something,
Be an interesting conversation.
It's a little awkward, but we've not with the sub labels, but there's been a couple. I remember over the years, there's been a couple of conversations we've had with ours where we're just not sure if this is your best work. Maybe let's try again or something like that.
Yeah, you're trying to be encouraging, but not. It's a delicate thing.
Yeah, obviously you don't want to shatter someone's ego or anything like that.
Did the record change after that? Did that conversation have an impact upon it?
Yeah, still waiting for the record. But yeah.
I was checking out as well. You've got the Carpark Records office playlist kind of kicking back. Do you curate that?
I occasionally stick my head in there and put some stuff on there, but I think it's mostly the rest of the staff. I'm an old man now, and I've kind of my days of top 10 lists and whatnot are behind me. But I used to be super into making lists and making end of year best of top 10 lists, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, I feel sometimes I look back at some of those lists and I'm just it just makes me squirm, how I feel I was a bit pretentious and whatever. I'll 2001 best of, and I'm looking at it, I'm I don't know any of these records. I was just trying to be really cool and pick some obscure records that I thought no one would have heard of.
Did you go back and listen to any of them?
I don't think so. My records are all over the place now. I've got a little bit of them here, but most of them are in self-storage. And we moved house in 2013, and a bunch of records went to self-storage, and I literally have not taken most of them out of the boxes since then. So it's a little sad, but such is life when you've got children and whatnot, and when there's music on the internet, pretty much any music you'd want to listen to at the touch of a button. There's not much incentive to want to go into a self-storage facility and alphabetize and organize thousands of records. So.
When you first started off the label, did you print vinyl, or were you kind of just CDs?
Yeah, we did vinyl from the beginning. The very first release was a CD only, but the second release had CD and LP, because it was an electronic label and kind of DJ kind of focused a little bit. And so it was always important for me personally to have vinyl of our releases, because that was kind of the world I was living in at the time. I was buying just pretty much vinyl at that point, the early 2000s, I would say.
When did you kind of first notice that resurgence starting to bleed into the kind of cultural mainstream, I guess?
I don't know. It's hard for me to say, really, because you read articles every few years about resurgence of vinyl, and from my perspective, it's we've always been doing vinyl. So the only change that I noticed was the change from when we would do one format releases initially when we started. If we thought the release was not going to be a huge release, or we just didn't have the budget, if we only had the budget to do one format, we would do a CD only release. And then I think at some point I'd have to look into it, but I think some point maybe around like 2007, 8, or 9 area, maybe it was when it turned into like one format releases became vinyl and digital instead of, at least for us, we made that kind of like switch over because more people were buying vinyl than CDs.
Sounds like you were a little bit ahead of the curve.
Maybe. I think it started with the cute post-punk reissues, and Dan kept bugging me. He's like, let's do vinyl instead. Like the people who buy these releases, they're like, vinyl people. And so after maybe a year or so of him hassling me, I was like, okay, you're right. Let's do it.
It's interesting to see how the music industry has changed over the last kind of 20 years since you've been doing the label, even out with the whole kind of vinyl resurgence thing, just the way that it shifted with the whole digital wave and everything that's happened as a result of that. Do you like the music industry and the way that it's changed? Do you feel like it's changed in a positive way for indie labels?
I think it's in a fairly good spot at the moment. I mean, just from kind of like a environmental perspective, I like that music is streamed more than having to buy physical products, just because there's kind of less waste involved and less stuff and plastic and petroleum products that have to be used. So that's definitely good. But yeah, I was definitely thinking, I mean, it has definitely been crazy. Like when I first started the label, it was kind of like right when Napster was going, and people were like uploading music and people were just listening to whatever they wanted for free. And it was just like kind of chaotic. And I like started a label, like basically at the point where like, people were like, stopped buying music. Luckily we kind of got to a point where people got comfortable like paying $10 a month or hearing ads to listen to music legitimately without like ripping off like artist or something, But there was a few, it was quite a few years there where it was just like kind of insane. Just like it was a big free for all. And like, I think back to like kind of like the mid 2000s and like, like Pitchfork and all these music sites, they would like have headlines about like records leaking and stuff. And it was just like so frustrating. It's like, why would you do that? Like just like encouraging
if a record
all
leak,
this, like, illegal activity.
They would run a headline on it, like promoting the leak.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like ridiculous. But they, at some point, I guess they made a decision to stop doing that, thankfully. But there was just like this, I don't know if you remember, it was just like there was like a few years there where it was just like every time a record leaked, it was like a big news piece,
Yeah. The music industry felt a little maybe slow to respond to it as well, do you think? And kind of address that problem. I guess it's a tough problem to address though, isn't
it? We tried. I mean, like, we would have like when we first started, we had these like, watermarked CDs, and those were like really expensive, and still records would leak, but you could, most of the time you could kind of like find out who leaked it on the watermark kind of. And now it's all like digital, which is a lot easier.
And yeah, they still do that now with digital, don't they? Like if I get sent through a thing in a press release, if you want to download it, it's watermarked.
Yeah. But it's, it's obviously, we don't have to like pay someone still pay a site, but we don't have to pay to like make all the discs and the plastic and we have to mail them out. And that was, that's a real big hassle.
It was like, did you ever hear that thing about Radiohead super gluing like the CD players shut when they were giving them out to press people?
I don't remember that. Did people have to come to a certain location to listen to it, or were they like mailing them out?
I think you went to a certain location and then they super glued the CD player shut and they super glued the headphones into the headphone jack. I think it was like Kid A time, taking it to the extreme.
Yeah, and just think about like, listening parties and, like, I don't know, do people still have listening parties?
Well, they do them over Zoom in lockdown, don't they?
Yes. But just to think like, like 20 years ago plus, it would be fairly common to have listening parties for records,
Yeah, there's a certain communal aspect that's a little bit more diluted now, I guess, when it comes to the music scene.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that like, like it's expensive. You have to hire out a space, you invite people. It's like costs a lot of money to have a listening party. Like who wants to spend that kind of money these days?
I guess if you were selling the record there, you'd maybe make your money back on sales, or you would have, I guess, maybe not so much now.
Perhaps, but yeah, just think about some of the excess, kind of like in the bigger parts of the music industry. Like when I was in college, I remember there was a Chicago band, Urge Overkill. They had they signed like a deal, I think with like Geffen or something, and they had like a major label record. And it was like a really big deal. And we got invited to this listening party down in the city and just went there. And I remember walking in, there was like just like stacks of like hundreds of their CDs just sitting there at the entrance for the taking,
It was just too much money then, though. It's kind of the opposite extreme.
Free drinks, living the life back then.
Did you not? Was the first show that you saw in college not Nirvana as well?
I think so. Yeah, that was definitely an eye opener. Got to Chicago in like September of 1991 and went to our college radio station, and they were playing "Smells Like Teen Spirit." The single had been released as like a CD single, and it was starting to get really big. And our radio station was like super like fascist underground indie rock kind of station at the time, and like started getting on like MTV and commercial alternative radio stations. And then the music director of our station was just like, "You can't play this song anymore." And they like, I think they like threw it away or something.
Burned it.
But yeah, a friend I had never really listened to them much until I got to college. And so when I got there, I had a friend who was like super into like, he had been listening to like, indie music much longer than I had. And he was like, "Oh, we got to get tickets to this Nirvana show." So we like went to the local record store because you had to buy tickets at a Ticketmaster location back then. And we went to the record store in town and bought 2 tickets and went to the show at the Cabaret Metro. And it was insane. It was just like, the place is like maybe 1,200 capacity. There was like a line of people wanting to get in like all the way down Clark Street, like for like a mile past, Wrigley Field. I've never been to a show like that since then. It was just like the most crowded show I've ever been to. Like I was up front by the stage for most of the show. And like, it was so packed that there were people like jumping up and down. And like literally at one point, my body was being lifted off of the ground because everyone was jumping and it was so crowded. Like it was, and then I was starting to get a little scared because it was getting like so packed. I guess I was getting a little claustrophobic maybe. And then I was having trouble breathing because it was just like, there was just like,
no air.
It was just so, yeah. And so I finally like had to go to the back of the room, way in the back. And then I missed the part where they started destroying all their instruments. I had to could only see a little bit of it from over people's heads, like Kurt Cobain, like smashing his guitar in the drum set and that sort of thing. But it was a memorable night for sure.
Did it feel like a moment? Did you get a sense of what was coming from that?
I don't know. I mean, I was only like 18 then, so I guess I wasn't thinking in those terms. But all I could think was just like, wow, like this is insane. Like I'd never seen anything like this before.
How did you gauge how big a band was back then? Kind of pre-internet.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's to think about life then versus now. Like there was just the communication just was not like it is obviously now. So we were kind of like operating in our own little world for a lot of things. We would get records sent to us at the radio station, and if we wanted to go buy stuff at record stores, we just like half the time we were just like going by what the sticker on the record said. Like that sounds interesting. I guess there was CMJ, and we could look at other people's playlists to get an idea what like other people were playing. But like in terms of sales numbers, like, yeah, we had no idea, it was all kind of just psychological, I guess, like this person's cool because of this, or this person isn't cool because of this kind of thing, but generally speaking, at that point in time, it was just like anything on a major label sucks. And, anything on an indie label is probably decent. It's very, very, very clear cut.
Has that barrier kind of been broken down now?
I think so. Yeah, it's been, I mean, there's still like some negative feelings towards major labels sometimes, but it's a little more nuanced, I think. Yeah, I mean, people listen to all kinds of stuff now. It sometimes confuses me for my old school indie rock brain at times, and like, just like, why do people who listen to this kind of music also listen to this kind of music now? Like this, why do people who listen to indie rock listen to like Lana Del Rey or Haim? Like this doesn't strike me as interesting music at all, but obviously I'm an old man. So
that's kind of what the label does as well, though. Like you have things at complete opposite ends of the spectrum.
I guess so, but I guess it's with, it's in my spectrum, I guess. So it makes sense to me. But
when did your kind of musical taste go through its biggest change? Like period of change in development?
I don't know. It's always kind of evolving, like I was in college, I was listening to a lot of indie rock and, jazz, and I had all kinds of other interests, like we had a store, Dusty Groove in Chicago, which is still around, that, sells mostly the kind of like groove based music and soul and funk and jazz, that kind of stuff. So, I was like listening to a lot of stuff from there, and I was basically kind of just like absorbing as much as I could. And then, after college, I started getting into more like electronic music and like experimental, like, like I was listening to like a lot of like Otecker and Aphex Twin and stuff on like, Warp and Reflex and that kind of stuff. And from there, my focus also kind of evolved into like, when I got to New York in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started like getting into like a lot of like dance music and like, house and techno and electro and that kind of stuff. And, listen to a lot of Brazilian music, like MPB kind of stuff from like the 60s and 70s, and just, whatever's around and sounds interesting, it's up for a listen.
Do you feel like you can trace the kind of change of your taste through the label and what the kind of stuff you were putting out?
Maybe just kind of like that, the first couple of changes, maybe just, like the change from like purely electronic to like electronic, but with some like acoustic-y instruments kind of like mixed in, to like the kind of just free for all kind of switch from like, 2006 or whatever. And I would say it's been pretty content with that kind of ethos since then, I guess.
Do you feel like you're ever attracted to artists that are prolific as well? Like if you look at some of the bands you put out, like Cloud Nothings and Toro y Moi, and they're putting out a lot of releases.
Can't say. I mean, I just, if I like some music, then that's what I'm attracted to. Like I don't think about being prolific or anything. So, and when I'm first starting out, the artists don't have much out, so I guess it's tough to say. I would say some of our artists are more prolific than others. Like Cloud Nothings or Toro y Moi, they put out records every year or so, and then we've got other bands that put out records every 2, 3, 4 years. So just kind of depends, really.
I guess it's gotten a little easier to do the former and kind of be prolific when you can do it from the home to a certain extent now.
Yeah, I guess so. Our schedule's still kind of the same. We're not like putting out more music, I would say, or anything. But it's also, I guess it just depends on what kind of music you're making, probably too, and like if you've got like bandmates to deal with, and like Chaz. He makes most of his music, I think, by himself with some guests and that kind of stuff. But
when it comes to the kind of your releasing schedule and how prolific you are there, do you have quite a good sense of your kind of maximum workload now? And do you know where to kind of draw the line so you're not overworking yourself, but you're making sure that each release is kind of getting the attention it needs and deserves?
Yeah, definitely. We don't typically like to put out more than like one release a month, I would say, and I kind of space that out like one a month. Occasionally, we'll squeeze 2 in a month, just if there's no other kind of way around it. But that's kind of like our general way of going about things, So we end up putting out, I would say, anywhere from, like 9 to 11 or 12 releases a year. And we try and be mindful of that. Like we don't want to overwork ourselves. And, we've, like this year, we've had quite a few releases, and people have records ready. And, we just basically try and convince them to, put it out later. And it's a little bit easier now just because it's like, well, this band has a record ready. They want to put it out in September. But, we've got someone else who wants to put a record out in September. So then we can be like, well, you can't tour anyway, so might as well, no rush to put it out. So let's put it out in 2022 when there's a better chance that you might be able to tour behind the record.
Yeah. You were pretty committed from the start of this though, right? To like not delay many releases. Like I remember from the start you were like, we're going to keep going because we don't know when this is going to be over.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, we're a record label, so, we put out records. We had a few artists that, like a year ago, they were like, well, I'm not sure if I should put my record out. But, I think we talked about it and talked to the artists and kind of convinced them that it was in everyone's best interest to just put it out. And, I didn't, see any point in waiting a year. Like you could, the artist could have like another record done by then. Plus, all these other people are waiting, and it's like waiting for what exactly? So, like a year ago, people were saying, "Oh, I'm not going to put." People are waiting and pushing the records back to the fall of 2021, or 2020, and then they're pushing the records back to the beginning of 2021, and so it's just at some point you just gotta stop thinking like that, I guess.
I think if you bite the bullet as well and put it out in 2020, there was probably a little bit of space opened up as a result of everyone pushing their records back.
Yeah, definitely. I think a few of our summer releases, I mean, obviously there's no way to know, but I feel like they definitely had more, space, as you say. Like they probably, they would have done well, but I think they did probably better than they would have done, just because a lot of people put the records off, and so there wasn't as much to write about. So that definitely was to our advantage.
I think people wanted music as well, didn't they? They wanted a distraction. They wanted something to kind of immerse themselves in.
That's true. Yeah, but it was just like such a weird, obviously such a weird time. And it's like first, like everything shuts down for like a couple months in like March and April. And then like come May and June, like you got like all these Black Lives Matters rallies and protests. And like then artists, like first it was like, people are like, oh, should I put a record out? Like, I can't tour. There's a pandemic. Like, and then a couple months later it was like, well, this country is like convulsing and like, it feels like it's falling apart. And it's just this, should I be releasing music like during this weird time? Like, it just feels, people are like, like feels like a egotistical statement to like put out music, like when all this like insanity is like, and change and just stuff is going on, So that was kind of like what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I guess when you're trying to release music in the craziest year in recent American history, it can prompt some unseen problems,
Yeah, we did delay a few. Like I think, like when we had one record and we were like supposed to release a single from the record on like a certain date, and it was just like, I don't know, like I guess maybe the height of like the protests and stuff, and I think we pushed it back like a week or two just because. We didn't think like many people were going to be paying attention to music kind of at that, or at least new music at that point.
How did the whole postal service thing impact you as well? I remember seeing a little bit that had a little bit of an effect with Trump trying to... Yeah,
that's an ongoing issue with the post office. It hasn't been as bad lately, but it was definitely had some trying experiences, just I think around Christmas was definitely the worst. Just like there was like stuff that we'd sent that just like would never show up at all. And a lot of stuff we were mailing, like even like domestic stuff stuff that would normally take, most first class media mail stuff would take like a week or 2 weeks max to get anywhere in the country. And people were getting packages like 1 or 2 months later, just like crazy stuff. And when the pandemic started, we kind of stopped doing like a lot of like international mail order from here. Like we started, like our UK office was doing all of our European mail order. And then we had like going to like Asia and Australia and New Zealand was just like crazy. So, we started working with this company in Australia to do like our fulfillment down there. We were like mailing stuff at the beginning of the pandemic internationally, and like months would go by and it's just like nothing. It's just like, where did this package go? Like it just like you look up tracking and it'd be like sitting in, a warehouse in Queens in New York City for like 2 months, or like sitting some, going to Tokyo and then going to Europe. like what is going on?
What was causing this?
I mean, I guess there's a lot of factors, at least to my understanding, the biggest probably being just the pandemic and less flights going because, less people were flying. A lot of our freight previously would go on like commercial planes, instead of just, it wasn't going on like, FedEx or UPS planes. We would get these cheap shipping rates because the stuff would get put on like commercial planes, and when a lot of that dried up, there wasn't as much supply, and the demand was still there, so the prices went way up. And then, you've got like with the postal service here, Trump was messing around with the postal service. I think part of his plan to undermine the election results and the mail-in voting and everything, just that. And also just the fact that because of the pandemic, people weren't going to stores and people were ordering, via Amazon and all this other stuff. So it's just the volume of mail circulating through the country was like a lot higher. And, I'm assuming it probably took longer to get the whole process going because of all the cleanliness and pandemic stuff, and employees getting sick. And so it's just, not a good situation, obviously.
Does this feel like something that's going to get better, or is this going to be a problem for a little while?
I feel like it's kind of leveled off now. Like it hasn't been as frustrating lately. The last month or so we haven't had many issues. Did send a box of records to our fulfillment partner in Australia a few weeks ago, and they got it. And it was literally like, they sent pictures of it, and it was like literally like wide open. And like someone had like put a piece of string around it or something, which is like really annoying. But I don't know, I guess when and if the pandemic ends and people start flying again, maybe that'll help with some of the international shipping issues that we've experienced. I guess the U.S. government will need to put a bit more money into the post office to get it to improve. But
you think the Dems would do that, though?
I guess so. I mean, it's like the post office never makes money, so I guess some people get all worked up about that. And we should not have a post office. It doesn't make money, but
it's pretty important public service, though.
Yeah, it's a public service. It's never intended to make money. Yeah, like you don't complain that the garbage collectors don't make money or something.
Was the whole kind of post office thing, is that partly why the physical release of the compilation is coming out in March? Like coming out a little bit later than when it went out digitally?
I don't know if it was because of the post office, but it's just kind of like, I think our general thinking now is, with these kind of releases, it can be a little flexible with like something like that. It's not like a huge seller, like the audio was ready. So we just figured we'd announce it. We'd put the pre-orders up for people who want to buy the physical. And then if they just want to listen to it, they can listen to it online. Another pandemic related problem is that, just the vinyl production times are just taking longer and longer. So we just figured, we'll do it this way. And then when the records are ready, we'll ship them out. Hopefully we'll make our release date for our distributor. But we've had a couple of instances last year where we've had to push things back just because it's taken forever to make records now,
Yeah. Does it just feel a little bit more unpredictable now? Like you don't know what could possibly happen at some point along the production line?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, definitely. Like, it's like when I started a label, we planned things maybe 2 or 3 months in advance, and that was totally fine. And weren't as many people making records back then. And then maybe like 10 years later, like more people started making records, and then we started working on like 4-month lead times or 4.5-month lead times. And we did that for a while, and just, in the past year, and now we've had to move back to like 6 months lead time, just because if I had to guess, it's just like a few different things. Like, the pandemic is, some plants are closing for periods of time when people get sick or whatever. And then because people can't tour, I think a lot of people are putting their money and making more records now. So you've got more records, and there's been like an explosion in LP plants, but it's just like there's still like so much demand. It's just insane to think about like all the records that are being made.
Just as long as the bubble doesn't burst. Like it's still at a period now where vinyl sales are increasing every year, but you don't want all these plants to be built and then for it to, stagnate.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the bubble might be for like collectors and stuff, but I mean, I don't think it's going to burst. Maybe it might slow down, but it's been crazy just to think about the core of our business is obviously the same. We put out records, but just some of the subtle shifts over the past year because of the pandemic, like we've been selling so much more online. Like I've had to do all the mail order since the pandemic, since no one's in the office anymore except me. And I was looking like at our PayPal statements and like our month-to-month sales. It was like from like January and February of like 2020 to like March and April, like it just like went up like fourfold, just like the amount of sales via PayPal. We're like selling more, I think, on our website than like our distributor is selling in the States. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, just because, I guess people, probably I would imagine that people don't want to go to stores. They'd rather just buy the records from the comfort of their home. And I think that's probably the driving factor. And we've been trying to take advantage of that a little bit and kind of like trying to put together like special releases that are only available on our website. And I feel like that's kind of like something that we'll be spending more time with in the future.
That's kind of what you want to draw people towards you directly. But then, it's tricky because you don't want to isolate the record stores either. It's a fine balance.
Yeah. I mean, we're not like ignoring record stores. I feel like we still are doing our share, like we're doing like a 10-year anniversary edition of Toro y Moi Underneath the Pine. We had this little like special promo thing where we made like a pine seeds packet with like some artwork on it that we're just sending to the record stores here to help them with the release. So we usually like to do stuff like that, or make a special postcard or a special tchotchke or something.
With this kind of compilation coming out and a couple of re-releases as well, like you've seen the Toro y Moi, and I know you did the first Cloud Nothings record as well. Came out, was it January that got re-released?
Yeah, I mean we did the record. Well, I guess Dylan's friend put it out originally on LP, and then back in like 2010 we put it out on CD because it never got released on CD and digitally, and that was the way it was for a while. And then like maybe a year or so ago we started talking about, well, maybe we should reissue it on vinyl again since it hasn't been available on vinyl for so long. And so we put it together and threw in some bonus tracks, and that was that.
Do you find yourself kind of reflecting on the label a little bit more now with these re-releases and the compilation and everything and the anniversary?
It's not so much. I think more about my own personal past than the record label past, to be honest. But just because, like, I feel like the pandemic, with not as much stuff to do, everyone kind of like thinks about the good old days, so to speak, entertaining themselves until this thing hopefully passes. I think I'm still musically moving forward. That's how I say it. I'm not the kind of person I'm still always looking to listen to new music and new records that I haven't heard. And I guess that's why I'm part of the reason why I'm in this position. I feel like most people will probably be happy to have their 5 or 10 records that they listen to, but that's it's not how I am, for better or worse.
Where have you found your mind kind of wandering back to when thinking about your past? What kind of period?
Just reflecting on my life and how to make it better, and just how to be a better person, and just kind of personal stuff, I guess, really.
Have you implemented any changes in that way since the pandemic started? Have you kind of changed anything?
It's kind of hard to change who you are, but it's definitely worth working on, and without going into super details, just trying working on character issues, that you feel like could be changed or would make life better. And so it's a constant battle, I guess.
With the pandemic kind of prompting that reflection, did you notice that paralleled in anything thinking about the label as well? Did you notice anything about that you wanted to tweak and maybe change slightly?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just such a crazy time to be, I guess, alive. And mostly we've just been working so much on just keeping the ship sailing, I guess there isn't a whole lot of time to think about that kind of stuff. I spend my free time doing mail order these days. So it's not a lot of time for me, just kind of like, I've got kids. And so I'm not really like, I don't have a lot of time to just sit around and be like, oh yeah, I like to put out more country music.
Do you not find your mind wandering a little bit when you're doing the mail orders?
Maybe sometimes. It depends on my brain at any given time. Sometimes I do mail order and it's just like, I really don't want to be doing this right now. And I'm like distracting myself and going on the internet and like, I don't know, reading stuff and then go back to it. And other times I can get in the zone and just like pump out like a bunch of orders in like a couple hours. Yeah, I guess I'm just I'm not like a big multitasking kind of person. Like I just I just want to do one thing and do it well at any given time.
What's the record for mail orders?
I couldn't tell you. I've definitely done hundreds. I did a few hundred over the weekend. The new Cloud Nothings record, and we got a batch of the Underneath the Pine reissues. So I was packing those up, and then we got 50 more Cloud Nothings records I'm gonna have to pack up today or tomorrow, and then next week we'll get the rest of the Underneath the Pine records. So I'm gonna have to do a few more hundred of those. So it's had a break for a while, but and then we're supposed to probably get those Sonic Boom remix records in later this month. So,
It's funny, you were saying that you're not, or just a little while back, that you're not a massive multitasker and you tend to kind of focus on one thing at a time. Is that a trait that kind of stands you in good stead for running a label?
I guess so. I mean, I just, when I think back, I've got a staff now, but I've got a few people who work for Carpark, and but like 11 plus years ago, it was mostly just me, and I had like publicists and radio promoters I'd hired, but I didn't have a staff, and it was just me. And just to think about, like, I guess the focus that I had then, like I would literally just like sit in front of my computer like almost all day, and I was just like sending emails, and like I was just doing everything. So just 10 in the morning to 10 at night, just or longer. So just kind of crazy to think about that then.
Does it take a certain type of personality to run a label, or to start a label in that way?
Oh, I guess so. I guess you have to be pretty obsessed with music and just driven to want to get your label out there, and then also then you just have the other aspect, which is more difficult, of just finding music that resonates with people. That's the hard part. We had a couple of early successes, kind of on the lower end, smaller successes starting off, and I feel like it took really a few years really for me to really get a good understanding of how the music industry works, and what's popular and what's not so popular, and what's not popular at all. And I feel like when I first started, I was kind of like I was like living in New York City and kind of in like New York City bubble. You can go to like shows with hundreds of people listening to like totally insane music, whereas when I moved down to DC, and same show where there would be like hundreds of people in New York, and you come to DC and there's like 10 people at the show. So it just kind of helps put things in perspective for how the rest of the world works, I guess, musically.
Did that impact your drive? Did it make you kind of more determined when you see that?
I don't know if it did that. It just maybe helped clarify my focus and what I wanted to do with the label, and kind of helped get Carpark to that kind of like anything goes mentality, I guess. Where, because I was just like, I can't, if I want this to be like a sustainable, profitable business, like I can't just keep putting out like IDM or experimental electronic music. Like that's just not gonna cut it. So I need to broaden the horizon, so to speak, and put out some music that's going to resonate with a wider number of people.
And here we are today.
Yeah, it's luckily worked out pretty well. So very grateful. I feel like running a label is kind of like a legalized form of gambling in many ways. So it's just if you pick a band, kind of almost at random, you like them, but what does that mean exactly? And then you spend lots of money trying to convince other people that they should like them too, and give money to them. Yeah, it's just all psychology, really.